The most dangerous man in Las Vegas history never worked for the mob. He was a Polish immigrant's kid from Pittsburgh who conned his way into the desert, built an empire out of pure audacity, and then, not once but twice, watched it all explode. And the shocking part, both times he came back swinging. Bob Stupak is the man Vegas corporate suits wish you'd forget, because his story proves that one lunatic with enough nerve can embarrass an entire industry. Hi, my name is Michael, and this is Old Vegas Legends, the scams before the Strip. To understand Bob Stupak, you have to understand where he came from, because Las Vegas in the 1960s and 70s was still very much a city that respected a certain kind of pedigree. You either had mob connections, corporate money, or you did not get a seat at the table. Bob Stupak had neither. What he had was a father named Chester Stupak, a Pittsburgh street hustler who ran gambling games out of the back of a candy store and taught his son the most important lesson Vegas would ever try to forget. The house edge means nothing if you can make the customer feel like they are getting away with something. Bob arrived in Las Vegas in the early 1970s, with a history that would make a compliance officer's hair turn white overnight. He had already run gambling operations in Australia. He had promoted a poker tournament in Europe that ended in a legal dispute. He had sold advertising specialties door to door. The man had more schemes than a carnival midway and twice the nerve. And the suits on the Strip took one look at him and decided he was not their kind of people. That was, without question, it's the single biggest mistake they ever made. Because Bob Stupak did not need their approval. He just needed a piece of land far enough north on Las Vegas Boulevard that the rent was cheap. And that is exactly what he found. Vegas World, the circus of broken dreams. Before we get to the explosions, and we will get to the explosions, do not worry. You need to understand what Bob Stupak was doing in the years before Vegas World existed. Because this man did not stumble into the casino business. He engineered his way in, one outrageous promotion at a time. In the mid-1970s, Stupak opened a place called Bob Stupak's world-famous historic gambling museum and casino. I want you to sit with that name for a moment. The man had been in Las Vegas for about 45 minutes, and he was already calling himself historic. That takes a specific kind of audacity that, frankly, I respect enormously. But the promotions. Oh, the promotions. This is where Stupak separated himself from every other operator in the city. While Caesar's Palace was busy being dignified and the Sands was cultivating its Rat Pack mystique, Bob Stupak was out in the parking lot dreaming up schemes that would have gotten him laughed out of any normal boardroom. He mailed coupons to hundreds of thousands of homes across America. Not fancy brochures, actual coupons. Come to Vegas World, we will give you a free room, free chips, and free cocktails. The casino industry looked at this and collectively rolled their eyes. Budget travelers and retirees looked at it and started packing their bags. This is the thing about Bob Stupak that the corporate operators could never wrap their heads around. He genuinely liked the working class customer. He was not performing populism for marketing purposes. He had grown up around people who worked hard and played harder, and he believed, with complete sincerity, that those people deserved a seat at the table just as much as any high roller. While the Strip was busy chasing whales, Stupak was building an army of loyal middle-class regulars who would follow him anywhere. And in Las Vegas, loyalty is the only currency that actually matters long-term. The Strip forgot that. Bob Stupak never did. Vegas World opened officially in 1974 on the north end of Las Vegas Boulevard, and calling it eccentric would be like calling the Grand Canyon a nice ditch. The theme, if you could call it that, was outer space. We are talking rockets on the roof, a space-age interior. Yeah, and a general aesthetic that suggested the designer had consumed several unusual substances before picking up a pencil. It was bizarre. It was garish. It was completely on brand for a man who once described his business philosophy as, give them something to talk about, and they will show up just to see if it is real, and they showed up. Because the promotions Stupak was running out of Vegas World were unlike anything the industry had ever seen, he offered packages where a family could fly to Las Vegas, stay for 2 nights, eat 3 meals a day, and walk away with a stack of gambling chips, all for less than the cost of a dinner on the Strip. The math made no conventional sense. Casino accountants across the city ran the numbers and declared it impossible to sustain. Stupak ran it for years. Here is how he made it work. Stupak understood something fundamental about human psychology that the suits with their spreadsheets kept missing. People who feel like they are getting a deal gamble more freely, stay longer, and come back more often. His customers were not just visitors, they were evangelists. They went home to Ohio and Michigan and Texas and told everyone they knew about this crazy place up at the north end of the Strip, where a guy named Bob treated them like VIPs, even though they were betting $5 minimums. In an era before the internet, word of mouth was the most powerful marketing tool in existence. And Bob Stupak had it completely figured out. The Strip hated him for it. Well, not because his property was competing with the Bellagio. It absolutely was not, but because he was proving, loudly and publicly, that the entire premise of luxury Las Vegas was partially a con, that you did not need marble floors and celebrity chefs to build customer loyalty. You needed to treat people fairly and give them value for their dollar. That message was deeply inconvenient for an industry built on the opposite philosophy. So they dismissed him. They called his place a carpet joint. They looked down their noses at the Vegas world clientele. And Bob Stupak kept cashing checks and laughing all the way to the bank. The first explosion, the fire of 1983. Now, the first explosion. On July 7th, 1983, a fire broke out at Vegas World. And I want to be very precise here, because the details matter. This was not a small fire. This was not a kitchen grease fire that got a little out of hand. Wait, this fire ripped through the property and caused damage so severe that a lesser operator, frankly, any sane operator, would have looked at the wreckage, called their insurance company, and quietly retired to somewhere with a golf course and reasonable property taxes. Bob Stupak looked at the wreckage and immediately started talking about rebuilding bigger. I am not exaggerating. While the smoke was still visible, while the structural damage was still being assessed, Stupak was already on the phone with contractors. He told reporters, and I am paraphrasing here because the man had a colorful vocabulary that would not survive modern editing, that Vegas World would come back better than before, and anyone who thought otherwise did not know him very well, which, to be fair, was an accurate statement. What followed was one of the most remarkable comebacks in Las Vegas history that nobody ever talks about. Stupak not only rebuilt Vegas World, he used the opportunity to expand it, add rooms, enhance the promotions, and double down on the very philosophy that had made him a thorn in the Strip side in the first place. The loyal customers who had been displaced during the rebuild did not go to Caesars or the Sands. They waited for Bob to reopen. That is the kind of loyalty you cannot manufacture with a marketing budget. That is the loyalty you earn by treating people with genuine respect over years and years. The rebuild took months. Stupak funded much of it personally through a combination of savings, loans, and the kind of creative financial arrangements that accountants describe using the word unconventional and lawyers describe using the word concerning. But it worked. Vegas World reopened. The customers came back, and Bob Stupak stood in the middle of his bizarre, wonderful outer space-themed casino and proved something important, that he was not just a promoter. He was a builder, a resilient, stubborn, absolutely maddening builder who refused to accept the verdict of disaster. Which brings us to the truly insane part of the story, the Stratosphere Tower, Stupak's moonshot, because apparently surviving one catastrophic fire and rebuilding from scratch was not enough of a challenge for Bob Stupak. Around 1991, he decided what Las Vegas really needed was the tallest observation tower west of the Mississippi River, all built on the north end of the Strip, next to his space-themed casino, because of course he did, the Stratosphere Tower. Even saying the name now, knowing how the story ends, there is something that catches in your throat, because the vision itself was genuinely magnificent. Stupak wanted to build a structure over 1,000 feet tall that would permanently change the Las Vegas skyline and give visitors a view of the desert that no one had ever seen before. He wanted thrill rides at the top, a revolving restaurant, an observation deck that would make every other attraction in the city feel flat and small by comparison. The problem, and there were many problems, was the money. Building the tallest tower west of the Mississippi is not a project you fund with casino coupon promotions and creative accounting. It requires hundreds of millions of dollars, institutional financing, construction expertise, and the kind of organized project management that Bob Stupak, for all his gifts, was not naturally equipped to provide. He was a showman, a visionary, a promoter of extraordinary talent. What he was not was a corporate executive with experience managing a construction project of this complexity and cost. To his credit, he tried. He brought in partners. He negotiated financing deals. He sold the concept to investors with the same breathless enthusiasm he had used to sell Vegas World vacation packages to retirees in the Midwest. And for a while, it worked. Ground was broken. Steel went up. The tower began to rise above the North Strip skyline, and people who had dismissed the entire idea as Stupak's grandest delusion started, very quietly, reconsidering. But the money was always the problem. Construction costs spiraled, financing arrangements fell apart and had to be renegotiated. The project attracted new investors who had their own ideas about how the property should be run and who should be running it. And here's where you need to understand something about the business of big construction in Las Vegas. When you bring in outside money, the outside money eventually wants inside control. That is not speculation. That is arithmetic. The second explosion, bankruptcy, betrayal, and the tower. The second explosion was not a fire. It was something slower and in many ways more painful to watch. It was the systematic financial and operational collapse of the Stratosphere project while it was still being built, and the quiet, clinical removal of Bob Stupak from the thing he had dreamed into existence. By 1995, the Stratosphere Corporation, the entity created to build and operate the tower, was in serious financial distress. The construction had cost far more than projected. The financing structure was under enormous strain, and the investors who had come in to save the project were now in a position to restructure it in ways that did not require keeping Bob Stupak at the center of the picture. The Stratosphere filed for bankruptcy protection in 1997. By this point, Stupak's ownership stake had been diluted to a fraction of what it once was. The man who had conceived the tower, who had sold the vision, who had pushed and promoted and lobbied and screamed the project into existence. It, though, was being shown the door of his own creation by people in suits carrying briefcases and restructuring agreements. And then, as if the universe decided the story needed one more devastating chapter, Bob Stupak was involved in a serious motorcycle accident in 1995 that left him with significant injuries, and then a stroke. The man who had survived a casino fire and come back swinging, who had dreamed up the tallest tower west of the Mississippi, through sheer force of will, was now fighting for his health. At the same time, his life's greatest project was being taken from him. I have covered a lot of Las Vegas history on this channel, and I want to be honest with you, when I first really sat down and absorbed the full timeline of what happened to Bob Stupak between 1994 and 1998, I had to put my notes down and take a walk, because it is a lot, even for a city that has never been particularly sentimental about the people who built it. The Stratosphere Tower opened in April of 1996, right in the middle of the financial chaos. Stupak was present. He attended. And photographs from that day show a man who understood, even in the moment of apparent triumph, that the victory had been hollowed out. The tower was real. The dream was real, but it no longer belonged to him in any meaningful sense. He was a guest at the opening of his own monument, the corporate takeover, and what was lost. The corporate operators who took control of the Stratosphere after the bankruptcy reorganization were not villains in the cinematic sense. They were not twirling their mustaches over Bob Stupak's misfortune. They were simply doing what corporate operators do, which in some ways is worse. They were efficient. They were rational. They looked at the property, assessed its strengths and weaknesses, and made decisions based on return on investment rather than vision or loyalty or the memory of what the place was supposed to mean. What they saw in the Stratosphere was a tower with a genuinely spectacular observation deck and thrill rides on a property that was geographically isolated from the heart of the Strip. And their solution to that geographic disadvantage was not to outmarket the competition with crazy promotions and aggressive customer loyalty programs, the way Stupak would have done. Their solution was to position it as a budget property and extract maximum revenue from guests who chose it primarily because of price. Does that sound familiar? It should. Because it is the exact same playbook we see being run today at the Excalibur and Circus and a dozen other properties up and down the boulevard. The building as a placeholder, the guests as a revenue source, the original vision as a liability to be quietly retired. The Stratosphere under corporate management became exactly what Bob Stupak had spent his entire career fighting against. A place where the pricing felt dishonest, the service felt minimal, and the working-class customer who showed up expecting value walked away feeling processed. The outer space aesthetic of Vegas World, that glorious, ridiculous, thoroughly Stupak vision of affordable spectacle, was gone. In its place was the beige, fee-forward hospitality of modern corporate Las Vegas. And here is the cruelest irony of the whole story: the resort fee. That instrument of modern nickel and diming that I have talked about on this channel more times than I can count. The mandatory daily charge for amenities you did not ask for and will not use. That strategy is now standard practice at the Stratosphere, the property that Bob Stupak built specifically to give working-class Americans a fair deal. Chester Stupak, his father, the Pittsburgh candy store hustler who taught Bob that the customer deserves a square shake. Somewhere, I like to think, he is shaking his head very slowly. What Bob Stupak's life means. Today, Bob Stupak passed away in September of 2009. He was 67 years old, and the obituaries, to their credit, acknowledged what he had built. But they also reflected something uncomfortable about how Las Vegas treats its unconventional pioneers. The mob guys get documentaries, the billionaires get airports named after them. The visionary lunatics who actually change the shape of the skyline get a respectful paragraph and a quick pivot to what the property is worth today. Here's what I want you to take away from this story, because it matters beyond the biography of one colorful character. Bob Stupak understood something in 1974 that the Las Vegas Strip is being painfully reminded of today. The working-class American customer is not a consolation prize. They are not the fallback demographic you tolerate when the whales are not biting. They are the foundation. They are the people who come back year after year, who tell their friends, who build the kind of word-of-mouth loyalty that no marketing budget can manufacture. When you treat them with respect, real respect, not performative hospitality theater, they reward you with something priceless. They make your property their place. That is what Vegas World was. That is what Stupak tried to build the Stratosphere to be. And the moment corporate management took over and started treating the customer as a line item to be optimized rather than a neighbor to be welcomed, the soul of the project died. The tower is still standing. You can still ride the thrill rides and look out over the desert from 1,000 feet up. But the thing that made it meaningful, the belief that ordinary people deserve extraordinary experiences at a price that does not feel like a shakedown, that is gone. And that loss is not unique to the Stratosphere. It is the story of the entire Strip. From the demolition of the Mirage to the resort fees at the Horseshoe to the self-check-in kiosks replacing the concierge who knew your name. The corporate takeover of Las Vegas did not happen overnight. It happened one balance sheet at a time, one restructuring agreement at a time, one Bob Stupak at a time. The man blew up his casino twice and rebuilt from the rubble both times. The suits who replaced him have never had to rebuild anything because they have never had the nerve to build anything real in the first place. If this story made you feel something, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment below and tell me your Bob Stupak story. Tell me about the first time you stayed at Vegas World or rode the rides at the Stratosphere. Well, Bob, tell me about the Las Vegas you remember before the resort fees and the kiosks and the 6 to 5 blackjack tables. Because in this new era of corporate extraction, your memories are the only things they cannot put on a balance sheet. And they certainly cannot bulldoze what you carry with you. My name is Michael, this is Old Vegas Legends, and I will see you in the next one.